As part of reconciliation efforts, the YWCA Halifax is committed to honoring the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. One of their recommendations on youth programs reads, "We call upon the federal government to establish multi-year funding for community-based youth organizations to deliver programs on reconciliation and establish a national network to share information and best practices." We at YWCA Halifax are honoring that call to action by partnering with the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Centre in working together to offer youth programming, while also ensuring financial resources are shared with the Friendship Centre to serve Indigenous youth. I have a few housekeeping points before we get into the meat of the agenda. And so the first would be, please bear with us. This is I believe, our first AGM using Zoom technology. We think we have thought through all of the contingencies, but if we have some hiccups, please bear with us. Copies of the agenda, the minutes, the slate, and the annual report are all available on the YWCA Halifax website, and I believe would all have been sent to each of you from Bridget over the course of the last few days. So hopefully you have those. I am going to ask you to mute yourselves, and it's possible that Shannon has all power and control, and she may have muted us, all of you already. But that's of course to minimize background noise so that we can have one speaker at a time. If at any point you have a question or a comment, though, please use the chat feature. Please don't rely on the wave feature because I can't see all of the boxes and have the slides up at the same time. So if you have a comment or a question, just say so in the chat feature, and we are monitoring that chat to ensure we don't miss anyone's voices. And so the other thing I want to touch on before we get into the meat of the agenda would be our online voting procedures. This is a different kind of meeting for us, doing this virtually, and so we'll have a slightly different approach to voting. So let me just walk you through that. I should remind you that voting is only for members of YWCA Halifax. That is not meant to be exclusive. Those are the terms of our constitution and bylaws, and so it's very important that we abide by those. So it is members only. This is how a vote's going to work. I'll ask for a mover and a seconder of any motion. Once it's been moved and seconded, the motion is then tabled. It's in front of you as members for consideration. I'll ask if there's any discussion at that stage. And throughout the process, if you have comments or questions, indicate so in the chat feature, and we'll make sure that you are brought into the discussion. Once I call for the vote, though, I'm going to ask you not to make any more comments in the chat feature for a couple of minutes, and here's why. Mia is going to cut and paste the motion into the chat box so that you can see it. It'll also be on the slide. And then we're going to ask you to log your vote by typing into the chat feature either yes or no or abstain. We might have some folks who are in by phone, and so if that's the case, you won't be able to use the chat feature. In that case, we're going to ask you to log your vote by speaking up, by identifying yourself, and then sharing with us your vote. Again, yes, no, or abstain. And then we'll give that a few minutes. After a few minutes, I'll say the vote is closed, and I think he is going to advise if it was carried or not. So I'm hoping that makes sense to everyone. I will remind you of that as we get to each motion. So we're going to start then, using the agenda in front of us, with the approval of our 2018 minutes. And so that would be for the meeting we held last year in 2019, but for 2018's work. And so you can see the motion in front of you. Be it resolved that the 2018 AGM minutes are approved as presented. Can I have a mover for that motion? And I'm going to ask the mover to indicate in the chat feature, please. Great, Nikki Mills moving that. Can I have a seconder for that motion? Jennifer Ashton, great, thanks Jennifer. Any discussion on that motion? We're gonna have just awkward silence for a moment. Okay, so at this stage, I'm gonna ask you to log your vote into the chat feature by indicating yes, no, or abstain, please. Again, members only. But please log your votes. And if you're on the phone, if we have anyone on the phone, please speak up now. Tell us your name and your vote. And I'm just going to give it a few minutes for those votes to come in. Okay. Mia, how are we doing on the vote tally?
Sorry, I have to unmute myself. So the votes that we have are all in favor. So
Okay.
we only have 5.
I was just going to say, but by my quick scan,
Okay.
it looks like we have a low number of votes. So when I say members only, I want to be clear, that's not board members, that's members of YWCA Halifax, which many of you, I believe, are.
Yeah.
So don't be shy with your votes.
And also all the board members, you are also board now members as well.
Great. Okay.
And Adina messaged yes to Jen Ashton.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to continue to move us through then. We now move in the agenda to the President's Year in Review. And so I get a few moments to speak about the year, the 2019 year from a YWCA Halifax perspective. I'm going to say, as I'm speaking, you're going to see some photos. I'm going to speak about this one in a moment, but as I go through, you're going to see some photos, primarily of YWCA staff in 2019 doing some of the amazing work that they do. We don't share photos of participants, and so that limits to some extent the photos that we can show in a slideshow like this. It might not be as close to the action on the ground programming as you'd like to see, but I know you'll understand why we don't do that. Excuse me. So bear that in mind, but we hope you'll find the pictures interesting nonetheless. It has been my pleasure and frankly my privilege to serve the YWCA Halifax as president of the board over this past year. I've been in the role now for 2 years, and after today's meeting, Megan Cadieux will very capably take over the role, which is fantastic. She'll be working together with an incredibly strong team of women that make up the board and the board's executive committee. But before that happens, I get a few moments today to share with you some of my thoughts about YWCA Halifax and the work this organization has tackled over the past year. I don't know if you recall what was on the slide just before this photo, but it talked about, it was Lillian Knowles back in 1917, and it was a very brief media report on her, what they called her illuminating, there it is, reporting on the many activities of the organization. So I will say I'm not sure my comments will be quite as illuminating as hers might have been, but that will be what I'll strive for. I will try and keep this brief. I know that Zoom meetings can be a bit exhausting. So I'll seek some brevity as I go, but I do hope to convey to you, because you are the members of YWCA Halifax, I want to make sure that you walk away from this knowing that your involvement with this organization matters, because the work of this organization is nothing short of transformative. So I could spend a lot of time talking to you about what we do. It's a long list of incredibly impactful work. We work to make it possible for women and children to escape homelessness, to escape violence, to escape instability, and to move to a brighter future. And so I am going to give you just a few examples on the what, but then I'm going to shift gears a bit. So in the what space, we've grown our initiatives on it's thinking specifically about 2019, by the way. We've grown our initiatives on the commercial exploitation and sexualized human trafficking of youth. We now have an emergency safe house for trafficking victims. Our incredible team of staff have accompanied families through difficult court proceedings. Our 2 peer outreach workers have very full caseloads, conducting outreach throughout the province and supporting our partners to engage with youth, the majority of whom are young women. We continue to tackle cyber violence, an issue that disproportionately impacts girls. We've expanded our Girl Space program this year to more schools. We've also expanded to include Guy Space and Y Space. We've expanded our early learning and childcare work to include all that it has, and now some before and after school care for some pre-primary children, which is getting off the ground. We're offering new programming now focused on sport and inclusion, building from the really great work done by Women Active Nova Scotia over many years in the Halifax area. And very genuinely, I could go on and on about what it is we do. We have programs and services focused on employment skills, newcomer women, youth, childcare and early learning, supportive housing, advancing women's employment in non-traditional sectors, and on and on. So I could go on for hours, but I won't, because when I think about the work of this organization, from the vantage point that I've had for the last couple of years, I am, of course, struck by what we do. It's essential. but I'm even more struck by and even more proud of how we do the things that we do, how this organization does what it does. And so what I mean by that is, thanks to the incredible staff and leadership team at YWCA Halifax, this organization never loses its focus on its primary purpose. It is to transform the lives of women and girls in our community. We are for, by, and about women and girls. And I can tell you, without fail, every member of this staff team never loses focus on that as the end game. And in everything that this organization does, I see nothing but being fully tethered to the values of the organization. And so you'd see these on the website: diversity, inclusion, respect, equity, security, freedom of choice, responsiveness, and collaboration. Those are not values that just live on paper or on a wall or on a website. They are deeply ingrained from what I can see in everything this organization does, every decision, every program, every interaction. So you might be left with the question, what does that mean in real terms? Now, I will say that this child, I'm not sure we're reflecting the value of freedom of choice, but I'm going to park that as a concern. So what does it mean in real terms? It means so much from where I sit, but I'm going to share just 3 examples for illustration purposes to explain why it's the how that I'm so fiercely proud of, in addition to the what it is that we do. So one example: when YWCA Halifax is developing programs or services or trying to make decisions about how to approach a gap that they've seen in the community, the decisions made by staff and leadership are never about the organization itself. They're always about the women and girls and the needs of the community. The questions that staff ask themselves are things like, will this further our mission? Will this make a difference in the community? And even, are we the best ones to do it? Are we the best ones to fill this gap? In some organizations, it would be the health or the size or even the stature of the organization that might be the guidepost. That's just not the case at YWCA Halifax. It is always about the mission. Another example, and I believe this is what makes YWCA Halifax such a fierce and effective advocate in the community. YWCA Halifax speaks truth to power. It's part of, as I said, what makes us so trusted as an advocate. We're trusted, I believe, by those who are relying on us to bring their voices forward on an issue. And we're trusted by those in decision-making power in government and in other places to bring real information and a credible perspective to bear. And the third example that I wanted to share, again, to illustrate the how it is that YWCA does what it does. Our staff work really hard to represent and to truly understand the women and the communities that we serve. That clearly means seeking diversity and inclusion in our hiring practices and in our services, but it is more than that. And I can say that Mia and her leadership team had a bit of an awakening, if you will, over the last year, that it is not enough to stand for inclusion and to stand for diversity. We also need to stand for anti-racism. We need to be in the fight with people of color in our community and in our staff. That awakening came before the tremendous momentum that we're seeing now in the Black Lives Matter movement. But that momentum is all the more reason to be in that fight now and well into the future. That brings me to the final thing I wanted to touch on today, and that is specifically the work that the board has been doing this year on your behalf as YWCA members. We have, of course, been doing all of the due diligence that you expect of a board and that we're obligated to deliver. And so we oversee the strategic direction of the organization. We review and report on financials. We have been revising finance and investment and human resource policies as needed. But I wanted, and that's all really important, but not the sexy work. I wanted to touch on 2 key highlights from our work this year that I think you as members should be particularly interested in. One, we have been building a stronger board through member diversity. The board made the decision in the fall that we need to be more deliberate and more proactive in our commitment to diversity as a board, quite separate from the staff and work within the staff of the organization. And so we made the decision that we will only accept top-notch candidates for the board as always, and that those top-notch candidates will come from the Black community. It's part of our work to create a stronger board, one that better reflects the community we serve and the organization staff. And I believe that we're soon going to turn over to Jennifer Ashton, who's going to walk through this year's slate, board slate, for your approval as members. And I believe that you'll see that that slate is a reflection of that commitment and that work. The second thing I wanted to highlight, again from a board perspective specifically, relates to financials, and we will soon hear from Grant Thornton about our 2019 financial results. But I will tell you, we were thrilled to end the 2019 fiscal year with a surplus for the first time in 7 years at YWCA Halifax. And I want to be really clear, that was not by chance. Yes, Donna, that really does deserve applause. And I can tell you as a board, there was applause and celebration and gratitude to Mia and to her leadership team and to all of the staff, because it's not by accident that we are now able to report a surplus. It was the culmination of several years of deliberate analysis and planning and forecasting, difficult decisions like transitioning the Barrington Child Care Centre, diligence and investment in fundraising efforts, relationship building with key stakeholders within both government and in the broader community, all under, Mia will hate this, but all under the wise and visionary leadership of Mia as our executive director. It is phenomenal that this organization has arrived at the place it is. And we don't believe that we're it's not a blip that we were able to report a surplus. We anticipate that we're on a much more stable financial footing for the foreseeable future. I also want to be clear, it'll continue to be really hard work to stay there. Every year, maintaining those results will be difficult. It is constantly Mia and her team, all of you, chasing down grants, chasing down funding. So not for a moment will it be easy. But this brings a level of stability and sustainability to our work and to our mission that is so important. And it enables us to do so much more than we were able in a previous world. There's a slide coming up. I don't know who's advancing. Is that Shannon? Can you move forward one more? Oh, sorry, one more. That one. Back up one. Sorry, that's the one. Mia found these gems today. The first one was from 1917, the little quote from Lillian Knowles reporting on her illuminating report. She found this one, which I think was from 1931. And I just need us to reflect for a moment on it. And so it says, in reviewing the progress of the Halifax Young Women's Christian Association, we feel our achievement is very small indeed in comparison to the growing need of the young womanhood of our city. But we may claim the vision of what we would like to be. I think in this time, particularly as issues like COVID reveal even more divisions within our community at large, it is a great time to reflect on that. I also, though, notwithstanding that, I think that continues to be true today in 2020, as it was in 1931. I think it's really important for you as YWCA members to know that this is an organization, unequivocally, I can say this, having watched closely for the last few years, this is an organization that punches above its weight. So the needs of our community continue to be tremendous, and this is an organization that is having a transformative impact. So it is therefore with great pride that I submit this 2019 President's Report to you as members. And with that, I'm going to turn us over to, I'm not sure if it's Jerry or Jisoo who will be speaking to us from Grant Thornton to present the 2019 audited financial statements.
I believe it's Chris.
This morning, it's Chris.
Sorry.
No worries. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Alana. I just wanted to take a couple minutes here and talk through the highlights of the current year audit. Did you want me to share a screen, or are we happy just to talk through this afternoon?
We'd love it if you shared your screen.
Yeah, screen would be great.
All right, let's see if I can figure this out. All right, let me know if you guys can see that. Perfect. So before I get into the financial statements themselves, there were a couple things that I did want to just quickly touch on. The first is our thanks to Mia and the team at the YWCA. As everyone's keenly aware, this year has been a bit of an anomaly with the impact of a pandemic in our midst. So as a result, it has required us to reconsider the audit approach. And unlike typical years where we're able to go out and be on site and pull our own invoices and that sort of thing, we had to move to an entirely virtual audit this year. So as a result, that did require additional efforts from the team at the YWCA to go through and make sure that we had the information that we needed. In addition, it required us to make sure we were doing sufficient appropriate audit work to make sure we were comfortable over the authenticity of the data and to enable us to complete the audit work. So a special thanks to the team this year for the tremendous efforts of getting us to where we are today. As we turn to the financial statements, there would be a new note disclosure as well relating to COVID that I'll briefly talk to. So the first pages of the financial statements would be our independent auditor's report on the statements. This report would be consistent with the previous year, and we do continue to qualify the audit report relating to the completeness of fundraising activities, which is common with many not-for-profit organizations and charities. Other than that, the audit report would be pretty consistent. Well, that's consistent anyway, so it is consistent with the previous year. When we turn to the actual statements themselves, the first statement would be the statement of revenues and expenditures outlining the income and outflows of the Y for the current year. Now, as was previously mentioned, it was a tremendous year for the organization. We can see down at the very bottom here, excess of revenues over expenditures of $123,000. So this does include a number of kind of other items, but even if we back up to the excess before other items, we see a positive income for the current year of $63,000. So a great year for the organization. If we look at that a little bit closer, we see that that's driven both by an increase in revenues and an increase in expenses, although revenues did fortunately increase at a faster rate. Looking at the revenues, almost $7 million in the current year versus $3 million in the previous year. And that's really driven by a few things, but the main is the government funding and grants. You can see almost $2.3 million versus 1.5 in the previous year. So this ties to additional programming and funding arrangements that have been achieved in the current year. So that's great to see, and some big projects going forward. Looking to the expense side of things, again, some
Chris, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can you blow that up a little bit?
Sure.
Thanks.
How's that?
Great. Appreciate it.
Perfect. Looking to the expense side of things, some fluctuation year over year. The biggest change, though, driving the expenses would be the salaries and employee benefits for the current year. So you can see that jumped to 2.1 million from 1.7. And really that's tied directly to the increased programming efforts in the revenue. So given the nature of the organization and the services provided, a lot of the contracts are very heavily person-based. So we do see that correlation going through. So again, with the total revenues of the 3.69 less the total expenses of 3.62, we come down to the 63,000 in revenues over expenses for the current year. There were a couple of other items, including some donation of shares, reinvestment of dividends, forgiveness of debt, and positive performance in markets that have contributed to an increased revenue over expenditure amount of 59,000. So when we add that to the operational amounts, we come down to the 123,000 for the current year. Looking to the statement of net deficit, we see that the current deficit of 156, opening deficit, has been virtually eroded during the current year to be a $32,000 deficit. So it's definitely moving in the right direction, and great to see from an organizational strength perspective. Looking to the statement of financial position, really the balance sheet of the organization outlining the assets and liabilities. We see some growth in the balance sheet. The assets of the organization increasing to 5.3 million, up from 5.1 in the previous year. And that's really driven by the large change in cash we see here, 751 versus 396. So that's tied to a few things, but one of the largest is increased deferred revenue. So a number of large contracts have come in, there's money available, yet the services have not been fully provided yet. So that's currently sitting in a cash balance here, and down under the liabilities, we see it as deferred revenue. The other assets, pretty consistent. Receivables down a large amount as a percentage, really given timing when those amounts are collected. And the largest asset by far being the capital assets, we can see that has decreased just as the amortization has more than offset any new additions. So again, 5.3 in total assets. When we look to the liabilities, under the current liabilities, the largest one would be the deferred revenues. That again is money received for various projects, but the projects haven't fully happened yet. The other large current liability would be accounts payable, and really that's just a timing relating to amounts that are owed at the end of the year but haven't been paid until the new year. Looking down on the other liabilities, there is a portion of debt that continues to decrease year over year, which is great to see, and deferred capital funding, which would be payments relating to offset the amortization on the capital assets. When we add up all the liabilities, we again balance with a 5.3 million. The only other change on the statement of financial position, as you can see down at the bottom, we reference the subsequent events. So there was a new note included in the current year as it relates to COVID-19. The final main statement would be the statement of cash flows. So I didn't plan to speak to this a whole lot in the current year, but I will note that from an operating perspective, you can see that there was a positive generation of cash during the year. So again, great to see and healthy to see in any organization. The rest of the financial statements really are the required note disclosures. So the accounting standards for not-for-profit organizations do have a number of mandatory policy and other disclosures. So these really are quite consistent year over year. The one that I will draw your attention to that is the change year over year would be the subsequent event note. So this has been put in the financial statements just to assist readers in understanding that although the COVID-19 pandemic wasn't declared until March, which is after the organization's year end, as part of your financial statements, they are required to consider everything from your year end until today, the date that the financial statements would otherwise be approved. So because the pandemic was declared subsequent to year end, it was required that an additional note disclosure explains that this happened and as well some of the impact to the organization as a result of it. So it's designed to be relatively high level, but just provide the users with a little bit of information as to how the organization is dealing with COVID-19. So those would really be my comments on the financial statements, but if anyone did have any questions or other comments, I'd be happy to address them at this time.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris, for that. Very helpful. I'm going to call for a mover and seconder, and then we'll have the motion on the table to approve those financial statements, and then we can invite discussion, Chris, at that stage. So the motion, Shannon, are you able to put the motion up? Oh, Charlene, sorry. The first motion, so the one on the left-hand side of your screen, is the one that we're now contemplating, which Mia has just pasted into the chat feature. So be it resolved that the 2019 financial statements are approved as submitted. Can I have a mover for that? Nikki, thank you. A seconder, Melanie. You guys are quick. Thank you. And so any discussion and or questions for Chris about the audited financial statements as just presented? I'm just giving a slightly longer pause, folks, in case anyone's slow on the typing. Chris, you made it so clear we don't have a single question for you. Okay, that's great, folks. So then I'm going to call for the vote. Again, I'm going to ask you now not to use the chat feature except for purposes of entering a vote. I do have to read what Mia's just said, though, which is thanks to our amazing treasurer, Nikki Mills, for her work. Thank you, Nikki. She does an amazing job for the board. I'm now going to ask you not to use the chat feature except for purposes of logging your vote. The motion is in front of you. I'm going to ask you to log your vote again by typing either yes or no or abstain. And again, if we have anyone on the phone, I don't know that we do, please speak up and let us know that you're there. We're getting better at this. Great job. Okay. I'm hearing no one on the phone. It looks like the votes have stopped rolling in. I can see them myself, Mia, that we have very consistent yeses on that one. So that motion is carried. We have a second motion as it relates to the world of finance, and that is each year the membership of YWCA through the AGM has to approve or appoint our auditors for the coming year, or in our case for the current year. And so the motion for contemplation that Mia has just posted to the chat feature is, be it resolved that YWCA Halifax appoint Grant Thornton as auditor for the 2020 fiscal year, subject to the board's authority to pursue other options in the interest of cost savings. Can I have a mover for that motion, please? Jen Gilbert, thank you. Seconded by Megan. Thanks, Megan. Any discussion on that motion?
I just wanted to provide my thanks from the Finance Committee to Grant Thornton for making this such a seamless process in light of COVID-19 and having things done over the internet. So thank you, Chris, and to your team.
Yes, thank you for those comments, and I will pass them along. And thanks for your involvement as well. And it was nice working with you during the current year's audit.
Great. Thanks, everyone. If there's no other discussion, then I will call for the vote. So again, I'm going to ask you in the chat feature to log your vote via yes or no or abstain for the motion that's already indicated there. A show of hands is so much easier. Great. Okay. Again, I can see by the votes that that motion is carried. So thanks, everyone. And thank you so much, Chris. You are, of course, welcome to stay with us, but just in case you're leaving us, I thank you so much for joining us tonight, for walking through those financials and for the work that your team does.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
We are now moving to the part of the agenda titled Nominating Committee and Election of New Board Members and Officers. And so I'm going to turn this over to Jennifer Ashton, who is chair of the board's nominating committee. She's going to discuss with you the slate that you as YWCA members are being asked to approve for the coming year. Jen, over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. I want to start by thanking everyone for agreeing to join the board and continue on the board to serve the YWCA in this really important function. So I'm excited to work with everyone in the coming year. And so without delay, I will announce first the board members for consideration and re-election. For consideration and joining the board for the first time for initial 2-year term is Chika Chiekwe, Sasha Hamilton Miller, Sharon Ishmwe, and Sylvia Paris. For a second 2-year term, we have Nikki Mills, and for the third 2-year term, Joanne Alverstadt, Jennifer Ashton, and Alana Patterson. The executive for consideration and election is Megan Cadieux as president and Jennifer Ashton as vice president, and the nominating committee for consideration and election is Melanie Bremner as chair and Jennifer Ashton as member. Do you want me to make the motion, Alana, or?
Oh, I think it's going to come up in just one second,
Okay,
Jen,
sure.
so we'll have it in front of folks.
I'm zipping through the picture.
That's okay. That was great. So I'm going to look for a mover and a seconder of this motion. The motion is, be it resolved that the slate of directors, officers, and nominating committee are approved as presented. And then I'll invite discussion. So can I have a mover for that motion that Mia has just pasted into the chat feature? Moved by Jen Gilbert, thank you. Seconded by Adina Cox. Great, thanks, Adina. Any discussion on that? I will, if I may, steal my prerogative as chair just for a moment. A huge thank you to Jen Ashton, who has for several years now done an amazing job chairing our nominating committee, and this year took up the charge in a different way with different direction from the board. And you have produced yet again a phenomenal slate of directors. And a huge thank you to those members of the board who are prepared to serve on the executive and on various committees for the coming year. It is really important work that the board does, and I have such confidence in our team of board members as we move forward. So thank you to everyone who will continue to be on the board, and thank you to those who are joining us. We're very excited eventually to have in-person discussions, but for now we'll settle for Zoom. But so very excited to have everyone joining us. Any other discussion? Okay, I'm going to call for the vote. You now know the drill. Again, I'm going to ask you to paste your vote, to log your vote, into the chat feature with either a yes, a no, or an abstain, and you can see the motion there. Great. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. And so Jen, I should, as you've just approved, of course, Jen is now leaving her role as chair of the nominating committee. And Melanie, thank you to you for agreeing so graciously to step into that role. Jen will continue to provide some support there, but Jen will be taking over as vice president as we move forward, as you've just seen. So thank you to you both. That's fantastic. I do want to speak just for a moment, as is very often the case, life and circumstances, and sometimes just end of terms come into play, and we always have some outgoing board members. This year we have 4. So to Kristen, to Deanna, Sanella, and Sue, I want to thank them for their contributions, for their commitment to the YWCA Halifax in the last few years. We're grateful for their contributions. We are also confident that our paths will cross again in the coming days and months and years. But we appreciate them sharing their talents and their time with us, and we look forward to their continued connection with YWCA Halifax as we move forward. Yeah, I think I'm now supposed to turn this over to you for a part of the agenda that I will not enjoy.
This is just, she's not actually leaving because we still have her as past president, but Alana's leadership as president is coming to an end. And I just, as the executive director, my relationship with the president is one of the key relationships, and any executive director will tell you that. And so it is a blessing always to have someone who has your back, but who, more than that, is able to bridge the board and the organization and the operations so graciously, so eloquently, and with such leadership. And it was Cindy Allen who said to me, Alana is the type of person who I will follow anywhere. And I feel very much the same. And it's been a real privilege to get to meet with Alana and meet in parking lots, to sign checks, and all the crazy things that we do, and to think about things and to kind of come to a place. And I think that part of the organization's success is because of also Alana's leadership. So you're very gracious around the operations, but I think having a strong board, and that our time also isn't spent on that our board is very strong and able to manage its own operations, is really a nonprofit board at its best, because your mandate is to support the mission, and that's exactly what you've been able to do as a volunteer. And so there's hundreds and hundreds of hours that went into that, and I will miss our time. I'm looking forward to my time with Megan, but it's been a real privilege, and I think the entire board has benefited from your leadership.
Thanks for that.
That's
Mia.
all. But we'll still see you.
Yes, indeed, all the time. I really do want to thank you all for joining us on a sunny Wednesday afternoon. I know that's not easy, and any meeting by Zoom is just a tricky time. So thank you for the level of commitment that it has taken to participate in a meeting by Zoom with us. But before we wrap up, I do again just want to take chair's prerogative for a moment. I want to talk briefly about the pandemic environment within which we are all working. I would be remiss not to answer a question that might be on some of your minds, which is, how's YWCA Halifax doing right now? in my president's remarks, I'm meant to speak about 2019, and of course, COVID has been a gift of 2020. So I want to speak about that just for a moment. Mia reminded us as a board recently, and as always, I thought she put this so well. YWCA Halifax has been in operation since 1874. We were here during both World Wars. We were here during the height of the Spanish flu and AIDS epidemics, as well as the end of polio as an everyday reality. We've been here since Canada's second Prime Minister. We will be here after COVID. Those were reassuring words. Like Mia, as always, has a way of putting things in excellent perspective, and those were words she shared with us as a board early on in this thing. What we can now report, I think, is we are doing so much more than just surviving. We continue to serve. And so I hope that you've seen some of our We Continue to Serve campaign. It has been, from my perspective, and I'm biased, phenomenal. I love the videos. I love the passion reflected in those. If you haven't seen them, go onto our Facebook site, go onto the website, you'll see them there. But thanks to the commitment and the creativity of our staff, we continue to serve the women and girls of our community with our programs, with our services, with our supports. And so some of the things that we as a board think about, we have not had to do any layoffs. We have reopened our childcare center. We are financially stable still, notwithstanding this pandemic. And we continue to serve. In some ways, we've actually been able to strengthen our services with pop-up shelters, supports for staff, participants, and partners through gift cards and tangible resources. Mia has given me a rough grand tally. We have been able to leverage something like $250,000 or more in resources that have gone straight back into the communities we serve. That's through things like United Way grants, food grants, family home daycare subsidies, cell phones, SIM cards, you name it. But specific COVID-related supports and responses directly back to community. So Mia has coined the phrase recently with me on the phone. She didn't know I was going to parrot this back, but that's what I do. She said, it's not who we are when times are easy, it's who we are when times are rough that matters. And these could have been very rough times, but the YWCA Halifax team has more than risen to the challenge. And so, as I said earlier, it's not just what we do that I'm so blown away by, it is how we do the things we do that makes me fiercely proud to be part of this organization. Our response to COVID, I believe, is an incredible illustration of exactly that. So, massive thank you to the staff. I know a lot of you are on this meeting. The work that you do is tremendous. Please know that it matters. It matters to us. It matters to the women and girls that you serve. So, thank you for all that you do, and thank you everybody for joining us tonight.